Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we go beyond the headlines. We take the raw data, the articles, the research, even the search trends, and we try to distill what you actually need to know to make sense of this new fractured reality we're in.
And for this deep dive, we are digging into the digital archives of 2025.
Sure.
What a year. I mean, it felt like it shattered every single expectation we had about what modern life is supposed to look like.
It really was a year of profound contradictions, almost dizzying.
Dizzying is the right word.
Yeah.
You had this administrative gridlock and, frankly, political violence that reached a level many of us thought was impossible in this country. It really proved that high-stakes ideology wasn't just something for the history books anymore.
And at the exact same time, you had this massive cultural shift happening, a definitive move eastward, driven by, youth trends, huge streaming hits, and collectible toys.
It was absolutely the era of the Great Fracture. You
Yeah.
can just see the deepening polarization across almost every single domain.
And nothing really captured the sheer scale of those shockwaves. The political, the tragic, the cultural like. The man who ended up topping all the charts. So we've gone deep into Google's Year in Search 2025 report, and that's really our roadmap for today.
Right. And the top search overall in the entire U.S. was one person.
Charlie Kirk.
His name just dominated everything. And unfortunately, it was tied directly to the tragedy that took his life. But that wasn't the only sign of just how unstable the year was.
No. The other top news searches were the assassination itself, but also this strangely named One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the historic government shutdown, which we'll get into, and notably tariffs.
A very telling list.
And beyond Kirk, the other key people trending, the ones who really defined the drama, included Zura Mamdani,
The NYC mayoral firebrand.
Tyler Robinson, who was the 22-year-old suspect in the assassination, and then, in this incredibly powerful turn, Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow.
So when you look at that collection of trends, you have a political assassination, a bureaucratic collapse, a municipal socialist winning a major election, and this aggressive global trade conflict. It tells you everything you need to know about the domestic instability.
Absolutely. That roadmap shows exactly why 2025 felt like it was constantly on edge. So our mission today is pretty simple. We're going beyond the headlines to unpack the why behind those top searches, to make sense of a year where it seems consensus just completely evaporated.
Let's start right where the trouble began on the domestic landscape. Because the political shocks of 2025, they didn't just happen at a ballot box or on cable news. They happened deep inside the actual machinery of government.
Okay, let's unpack this with Section 1. Political earthquakes and administrative paralysis. The phrase government shutdown was a top news search, and we've seen those before. This one was different. It wasn't just frustrating, it was statistically damaging. It fundamentally messed with the core economic data we all rely on.
And that's where the technical details get critically important and, yes, surprisingly fascinating. We all rely on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, and specifically the Current Population Survey, the CPS, for things like the national unemployment rate.
All the big numbers.
All the big numbers. And this historic shutdown had direct, measurable effects on the integrity of that data.
The most obvious one being that they just lost the October 2025 data collection. It's gone. And you can't just skip a month in a survey like that without having to radically adjust your methods.
Precisely. The CPS isn't just a simple snapshot. It uses this really sophisticated methodology. It's called the AK form of composite estimation.
Right.
And this is basically the secret sauce that improves accuracy and, crucially, it reduces the standard errors in the month-to-month changes. And it works because it leverages the fact that they have a typical 75% overlap in the sample from one month to the next.
So if 3/4 of the people they survey in September are the same ones they survey in October, it gives them a lot of confidence in the direction of the change.
Exactly. It's all about that consistency. So when October just evaporated due to the shutdown, the whole mathematical model for November was suddenly broken. The BLS had to modify the composite estimation's difference term.
Meaning instead of looking at the change from October to November?
They had to change the math to reflect the 2-month change. They were comparing September to November directly.
Now that sounds like a super technical change that only a statistician would care about, but what was the actual real-world consequence for the data's reliability?
Well, the consequence was a dramatically reduced data overlap. I mean, instead of that typical 75% sample overlap they use for the month-to-month changes, the new calculation for November only had a 50% sample overlap between September and November.
50%. So you've lost a quarter of your common data points right there.
You've lost a quarter of your common observations. which means the continuity you need for those really precise comparisons is just gone.
Okay, let's slow down on that 50 versus 75% number, because that's really the core of the problem. For anyone who isn't a statistician, can you just walk us through why that 25-point drop is so bad?
Sure. Think of it like trying to measure a gradual trend, maybe the temperature rising in the spring. If 75% of your thermometers are the same every single day, you can be pretty confident that any small daily change is real.
Right, you trust the instruments.
But if only 50% of them are the same from one measurement to the next, you have a much greater risk that a change you're seeing is just due to a few new, slightly inaccurate thermometers you just put into the mix. There's more randomness.
So fewer reliable common points between the 2 months just means more statistical noise, higher error.
That is the statistical reality. The November 2025 estimates ended up having slightly higher variances than usual, which is the technical way of saying they were less trustworthy.
Yeah.
The BLS actually reported that the standard error for the national unemployment rate was larger than usual by a factor of 1.06.
Which might not sound like a huge number, but for something as critical as the national unemployment rate, that's a significant wobble.
It is. And they anticipated that these slight increases in standard errors, this data noise, might persist for several months as they try to get back to the normal 75% overlap cycle.
And if the math wasn't bad enough, the human disruption, the chaos of the shutdown also contributed to this data quality crisis. The participation rate dropped.
It dropped to a record low. The November 2025 CPS response rate was just 64.0%. That's a new series low.
Wow. What was it normally?
The 12-month average was 68.4%. And to put that 64% in context, the previous series low was 64.9%. And that happened during the absolute height of the COVID-19 pandemic back in June 2020.
So you're saying the shutdown created a level of real-world disruption on par with a national public health emergency?
In terms of data collection, yes, it was that significant.
And the result for you, the person just trying to understand the economy, is that you're dealing with data that's inherently less precise, harder to compare, and full of caveats, right when economic stability was what everyone was looking for.
It raises this profound question about the resilience of our core government functions in an era of constant instability. When political gridlock translates directly into diminished data quality, it affects everyone, from policymakers to investors. Political instability has a statistical price.
And that instability wasn't just ruining economic statistics, it also manifested in these huge legislative fights and renewed global trade conflicts, both of which were top search trends.
This is critical context for the mood in the country at the time. Beyond the shutdown, two other big search trends really defined the political year: the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and the return of aggressive tariffs.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I mean, what a title. It's almost comically grandiose. It became a huge point of legislative drama. What was it, and why was it trending so much?
The name itself came directly from President Trump's rhetoric. He was promising this massive single piece of legislation that would consolidate a bunch of his policy goals.
Like what?
A comprehensive tax overhaul, significant deregulation in environmental and financial sectors, and a massive border spending package. It was essentially an omnibus bill designed to be too big to fail.
But the search trend suggests it didn't exactly pass smoothly.
Far from it. That bill became the political football that contributed directly to the shutdown drama we were just talking about. It was the vehicle for the administration's most aggressive demands, and it led to intense polarization. The search trend wasn't about public support for it. It was about the legislative chaos surrounding its failure to pass key votes. It really symbolized that all-or-nothing approach to governing that defined the year.
And the other big economic political trend, tariffs. This wasn't just background noise. It was a major news search topic.
Right. The administration dramatically ramped up the use of aggressive tariffs, targeting key industrial sectors, particularly goods from China, but also increasingly from European allies. These weren't just standard trade adjustments. They were designed to protect specific American industries and to force this immediate unilateral restructuring of global supply chains.
And we'll see later in the cultural section how these tariffs even became part of a satire, specifically by driving up the price of collectible toys.
Exactly. The searches weren't just driven by economists reading policy papers. They were driven by consumers, manufacturers, and small business owners who were dealing with these sudden, unpredictable price spikes and supply chain snags. The tariffs were a really palpable source of economic anxiety, directly linking the administrative chaos in Washington to the average household's budget.
So we've got data paralysis, legislative maximalism, and global trade friction uniting D.C. Now let's pivot away from that bureaucratic mess to a fierce ideological battle that was playing out on the municipal stage.
In New York City,
The second great political shock was the massive upset in the Democratic mayoral primary, the rise of Zoran Mamdani.
and Mamdani was a top-searched person for a very good reason. His victory over the seasoned, high-profile Andrew Cuomo was a genuine political shockwave to the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. Cuomo conceded on June 25th, and it was a stunner.
When we look at the internal polling data, it's pretty clear why this felt like such an upset. I mean, Cuomo had the name recognition, the establishment support. He was polling really high.
For months, he had this strong lead, consistently polling around 30 to 40% in first-round preference polls. In a traditional election, he looked unbeatable. The key, however, was New York's use of ranked choice voting, RCV.
Right, and that mechanism just fundamentally changed the entire political calculus.
It really did. It allowed Mamdani to capitalize on the fact that the moderate vote was so divided.
Can you just walk us through the RCV factor here? Because this is
Okay.
where the tactical genius of the progressives, or maybe the tactical failure of the establishment, really played out.
Absolutely. In a traditional system, if Cuomo gets 40% and three other moderates split another 40%, and Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist, gets 20%, Cuomo wins easily.
He cruises.
But under RCV, if no one gets a majority on the first count, the last place candidate gets eliminated, and their votes get redistributed based on their voters' second choices. And this process just keeps repeating until someone hits 50% plus one.
So even if Cuomo got, say, 35% of the first place votes, and Mamdani only got 20%, if the other 45% of voters who chose candidates like Brad Lander or Jessica Ramos often ranked Mamdani as their second or third choice.
Then the RCV system effectively consolidated the entire anti-establishment and progressive vote onto Mamdani.
That's exactly the mechanism that unfolded. The race was never about winning the first preferences where Cuomo was dominant. It was all about securing those crucial second and third votes from a very crowded field.
And the complexity was amplified when Eric Adams, who had been in that moderate lane, withdrew from the Democratic primary on April 3rd to run as an independent. That scattered the moderate establishment vote even further and potentially freed up even more RCV transfers for Mamdani.
It's the ultimate lesson in the power of secondary preferences. But what really underscores the ideological weight of this upset was the extraordinary amount of money that was spent just to stop him.
The level of backlash and funding against Mamdani was staggering. I mean, we're talking about approximately $18 million deployed by just a handful of the biggest names in finance and media, all dedicated to supporting Cuomo and attacking Mamdani.
18 million.
The largest single contributor was Michael Bloomberg. He alone poured $13.3 million into it through various super PACs, with names like Fix the City and Defend NYC.
And one of them was literally named Anyone But Mamdani. It doesn't get much more direct than that.
Not at all. It was a blunt declaration of existential opposition. And Bloomberg was the lead, but you had other major anti-Mamdani donors. The Lauder family spent $2.6 million. Joe Gebbia, the co-founder of Airbnb, put in $2 million. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, $1.75 million.
And Barry Diller and Steve Wynn, too, right?
Yes. Media mogul Barry Diller and casino magnate Steve Wynn each donated $500,000. This coalition of wealth just ran these aggressive, often negative advertisements against him, spending nearly $2 million on attack ads just in the final week.
When you see that level of concentrated wealth mobilized against a single municipal candidate, it tells you the battle was purely ideological. And those ideological attacks, they quickly descended into something deeply personal and, frankly, Islamophobic.
The campaign was marred by this explicit and really disturbing rhetoric that went way beyond normal political sparring. This is where we see the late Charlie Kirk posting on X, making a direct and unvarnished link between Mamdani and the 9/11 attacks.
I remember this. It was shocking.
He wrote, 24 years ago, a group of Muslims killed 2,753 people on 9/11. Now a Muslim socialist is on track to run New York City.
That is just leveraging the worst trauma in the city's history to smear a political opponent based on their faith.
And it was compounded by high-ranking federal officials. Vice President J.D. Vance publicly mocked Mamdani's personal story about his aunt experiencing Islamophobia after 9/11. He wrote that, according to Mamdani, 9/11's real victim, their aunt, who had to endure, allegedly, some bad looks.
It's an attempt to minimize and ridicule the whole narrative of racial and religious profiling.
Yes. And even Cuomo's own campaign faced criticism for alleged dog whistle tactics.
Right, the beard thing.
That's right. Cuomo's campaign was criticized for using campaign materials that allegedly portrayed Mamdani with a longer and darker beard, which Mamdani himself publicly called a racist stereotype, an attempt to visually link him to dangerous foreign archetypes instead of a legitimate local politician.
And if we look at Mamdani's background, it's easy to understand why he became such an ideological lightning rod. I mean, he was the complete antithesis of the established New York political machine.
Mamdani was born in Uganda. He's the son of the highly respected intellectual Mahmoud Mamdani and the Oscar-nominated Indian filmmaker Mira Nair. His father's family roots are in Gujarat, India, and Mamdani explicitly self-identifies as a democratic socialist.
And his politics were already known for being highly contentious on the global stage, too.
Right, exemplified by his history of openly calling Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi a war criminal for the 2002 Gujarat riots. He even directly compared Modi's actions to those of Benjamin Netanyahu.
So the New York election was really less about municipal governance and more about this seismic ideological conflict. It attracted the wrath of national conservative voices and billionaire donors, and it really set the stage for the rest of the year. The domestic fracture lines were fully visible before summer even ended. The intensity of those domestic political fights didn't mean the world stage slowed down. So let's transition now to Section 2. Global conflict and geopolitical tensions. While the U.S. was consumed with its administrative paralysis and internal ideological battles, the world stage was lit up by a serious, short, conventional conflict.
The Iran-Israel War in June 2025.
It was a rapid, high-stakes, 12-day armed conflict that just underscored the extreme volatility of the region.
So what's fascinating here is not just the fact that the war happened, but the precision and the strategic targets that were involved in the Israeli strikes against Iran.
Israel's strikes were highly concentrated on neutralizing Iran's strategic capabilities, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, their nuclear infrastructure and their military command centers.
Absolutely. Israel executed strikes on key nuclear facilities, most notably the Fordo nuclear site, which is, highly fortified, built deep into a mountain.
A very hard target.
A very hard target. They also struck the Arak heavy water reactor, a site crucial for potential plutonium production, but they did so only after issuing an explicit evacuation warning to the surrounding area.
Which suggests an attempt to, maintain a non-nuclear threshold while still hitting a key nuclear target.
That seems to be the interpretation. And centrifuge production sites were also hit hard.
And what was the international reaction to the targeting of a nuclear facility like that?
It was met with immediate, though kind of muted, international concern. After the conflict, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, quickly sent in inspectors and reported that there were no radiological effects from the strike on the Arak reactor, which largely diffused the immediate global panic over a potential nuclear incident.
And beyond the nuclear sites, the sources say Israeli commandos were active.
Yes. Israel targeted IRGC command centers and key Air Force bases. And the military chief later confirmed that Israeli commandos reportedly operated inside Iran during the 12-day war. This suggests a highly integrated strategy, combining long-range airstrikes with localized intelligence and targeted disruption on the ground.
And the sources reference one particularly aggressive operation that got a very striking nickname.
Indeed. Some of the strikes that were targeting senior Iranian military and political leadership were dramatically referred to in military circles as the Red Wedding Operation.
The Red Wedding. From Game of Thrones.
From Game of Thrones. An operation which reportedly killed multiple senior Iranian generals. For listeners who might not be familiar with that reference, the nickname comes from a famously brutal, unexpected, and devastating betrayal scene in fiction. It implies the operation was a sudden mass execution of leadership in a context where they might have felt secure. It really speaks to the psychological dimension of this conflict.
So after this extensive targeted campaign, how did Iran retaliate and what was the impact on Israel?
The Iranian retaliation involved massive, widespread missile attacks on Israeli population centers. It marked one of the largest conventional missile barrages in the region's history. Iran fired an estimated 150 to 200 ballistic missiles in multiple barrages over the 12 days.
That is a staggering number of missiles to be launched in such a short time. Where did they land?
Impacts were reported across every major city. Jerusalem saw sirens sounding for 30 minutes straight. Strikes hit Tel Aviv. In Haifa, the major oil refinery was damaged, forcing a partial shutdown that had real economic ramifications.
And there were civilian casualties?
Tragically, yes. Impacts were reported in Bat Yam, where civilians were killed, and most alarmingly in Beersheba, where a major hospital, Soroka, was hit.
Hitting a major medical facility would certainly heighten the sense of crisis.
It did. The strike on Soroka Hospital caused extensive damage and led to a suspected chemical leak that required a significant emergency response. Furthermore, the IDF reported Iran was using ballistic missiles that were equipped with cluster warheads against targets in central Israel.
Which raises the civilian threat significantly, just due to the widespread, indiscriminate nature of that kind of ordnance.
Exactly.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the conflict wasn't just fought with missiles and commandos, it spilled into the digital and civil space within Iran itself.
Internally, the Iranian government, fearing coordinated Israeli online aggression and internal dissent, implemented widespread internet outages and shutdowns across major cities. Citizens reported feeling walled in, with severely limited access to outside information.
And the government actually told people to delete certain apps, right?
Yes. Authorities went so far as to explicitly tell Iranians to delete WhatsApp due to concerns about the company's data-sharing policies and perceived connections to Israeli intelligence.
And this is where that cultural and technological fragmentation becomes so clear. Starlink provided a countermeasure to the state-mandated blackout.
That's exactly. Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet service was rapidly reactivated for Iran, specifically to provide uncensored access to Iranian civilians during the conflict. It created this vital, if small, technological lifeline designed to circumvent the government blackouts. It highlights a truly modern theater of conflict, state-level censorship countered by private transnational technology.
It's the juxtaposition of the conventional and the cutting edge. Missiles flying overhead, commandos on the ground, and a parallel digital war being fought between state blackouts and private satellite services. The intensity of June 2025 was truly global.
And, as often happens, the world's attention also turns to the massive spectacle of global sports for distraction.
Right in the middle of this geopolitical tension, we saw a major event in sports, the expanded FIFA Club World Cup.
This was a major historic expansion of the tournament, growing from just 7 to an enormous 32 teams. And it was held in the United States from mid-June to mid-July, running almost perfectly concurrently with the heaviest conflict days in the Middle East.
That contrast war and massive sporting spectacle is an inherent part of the year's fracture narrative.
It is.
What were the notable takeaways from the expanded tournament, aside from the huge logistics?
It was a massive financial and attendance success. Chelsea FC emerged as the champion, with Paris Saint-Germain taking the runner-up spot in the final. The tournament boasted high total attendance, nearly 2.5 million spectators across the U.S. venues.
And the prize money was huge.
A colossal $1 billion total prize money, reflecting its new, expanded prestige on the global soccer stage.
$1 billion global soccer tournament, a historic government shutdown, and a short, conventional war between two state actors all within a single season. It sets the scene perfectly for the year's defining and most heartbreaking tragedy. We turn now to Section 3, the defining tragedy of September. The assassination of Charlie Kirk instantly dominated search trends, sparked immediate and divisive political upheaval, and tragically cemented his status as the #1 searched person of the year. It's an incredibly painful end to a young, influential life.
Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old. He was fatally shot in the neck on September 10, 2025, while he was speaking under a tent during his American Comeback campus tour.
This was at Utah Valley University, UVU, in Orem, Utah.
Right. And the details that came out of the investigation were chilling. The fatal shot came from the roof of a nearby building, reportedly the Lew Center, fired from approximately 142 yards away.
He had security, right.
He traveled with private security, but witnesses and subsequent reports noted a visible lack of comprehensive security measures at the event, specifically criticizing the lack of perimeter defense. His security chief later publicly claimed that the local police had failed to properly secure and cover the rooftops in their joint security plan.
The manhunt was intense, but it concluded pretty quickly the following day.
Yes. The suspect, Tyler James Robinson, age 22, from Washington, Utah, surrendered after a 33-hour manhunt. He was convinced to turn himself in by his parents, who actually drove him to the sheriff's office.
And he was taken into custody without incident?
That's right. Prosecutors wasted no time charging Robinson with aggravated murder, and they announced they are seeking the death penalty, alleging the attack was politically motivated.
What were the key pieces of evidence, both physical and digital, that linked Robinson to the crime?
Physically, the key evidence included a rifle with a scope and, most chillingly, inscribed bullet casings, which were found in a wooded area nearby. DNA evidence later matched Robinson to palm prints and a screwdriver that were found on the roof of the building where the shot was fired.
And here's where it gets really interesting and also incredibly modern in terms of a criminal investigation. The social media evidence. The digital confession found on Discord.
The FBI recovered messages from Robinson's private Discord group chat. Initially, after the suspect images were released, Robinson reportedly joked about the situation. He suggested he had a doppelganger trying to frame him, and he referenced avoiding McDonald's, a dark, ironic nod to another major case involving Luigi Mangione.
And he mentioned getting rid of the evidence.
He did. He mentioned getting rid of both his manifesto and the rifle. But later that same day, the digital record shows this clear shift from that macabre humor to a genuine confession.
What did it say?
The crucial recovered message, posted later on September 10th, was a definitive confession. It said, "Hey guys, I have bad news for you all. It was me at UVU yesterday. I'm sorry for all of this. I'm surrendering through a share friend in a few moments. Thanks for all the good times and laughs. You've all been so amazing. Thank you all for everything."
Wow.
And Discord subsequently suspended his account, but the messages were already captured and served as a crucial piece of evidence confirming the identity of the shooter.
But before any of those official details were released, the media landscape just exploded with this damaging, politically charged misinformation that immediately dictated the national response.
This is a critical point that perfectly illustrates that fracture in our media and political information flow. Early reporting, most notably in the Wall Street Journal, falsely claimed, based on an unverified ATF bulletin, that the inscriptions on those bullet casings found at the scene related specifically to transgender ideology.
And prominent conservative figures just seized on this unverified report to immediately justify a political crackdown.
Absolutely. Even though senior law enforcement officials were cautioning that this alleged bulletin was unverified and didn't match their known facts, influential conservative figures used the Wall Street Journal report as justification. They called for drastic, immediate action against the transgender community.
Ranging from banning pride flags in public schools to calls for mass incarceration of trans activists.
Right. They were framing the shooting as a direct act of violence stemming from that ideology.
So when the actual evidence, the Discord messages, was released and contained no such references, there was an inevitable demand for accountability against the media outlet.
The backlash was severe. The Human Rights Campaign publicly demanded a full retraction. They criticized the reporting as reckless and irresponsible, and specifically highlighted the resulting wave of threats and violence that were directed against the trans community across the country because of it.
Did the Journal retract?
Well, the Wall Street Journal later amended its story with a lengthy editor's note explaining the change in information, but they notably did not issue a full retraction, leaving many critics to argue that the damage was already done. The whole episode just shows how quickly politically convenient misinformation can be manufactured and weaponized to target marginalized groups.
This tragedy instantly became the political flashpoint of the year. It was used by allies of the administration to justify sweeping anti-free speech measures, turning a moment of national tragedy into a crisis of civil liberties.
The political exploitation began immediately. President Trump quickly blamed the radical left for the killing before the suspect's identity or motives were even confirmed. He later explicitly used the assassination to justify measures to silence opponents and target far-left groups.
He vowed publicly to dismantle leftist institutions and crack down on dissent.
And this translated into an immediate crisis for free speech and employment across the country. We saw an unprecedented crackdown on dissenting speech. People, including teachers, adjunct professors, employees nationwide, were fired or disciplined for social media posts that allegedly celebrated or mocked Kirk's death, or even just expressed anti-Kirk sentiment.
And the administration appeared to be leveraging federal resources to do it.
It appears so. Pete Hegseth reportedly instructed Pentagon staff to search social media for negative Charlie Kirk posts made by service members, an action that led to at least one Marine being fired for comments he made off-duty.
That is leveraging a tragedy for political surveillance and retaliation. It raised massive alarm bells among critics who saw some historical echoes in this reaction.
Indeed. Critics across the political spectrum, including voices on the left and even some traditional conservative voices like Tucker Carlson, warned that Trump and his allies were exploiting Kirk's death as a political pretext. They framed the administration's response as a direct attack on the First Amendment.
They compared it to the Reichstag fire.
Exactly. referencing the 1933 event in Germany that was exploited to suspend civil liberties and consolidate authoritarian power. The speed and the scope of the reaction were genuinely alarming to a lot of people.
The ultimate expression of Kirk's legacy and the deep ideological fault lines that define 2025 played out during his massive memorial service. It was a gathering of mourning, but it became a theater of ideological war.
Memorial was held at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. It reached its immense 200,000-person capacity, which is an incredible tribute to his influence at only 31 years old, and it was attended by the entire conservative elite.
Trump, Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson.
Everyone. Kirk was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he was praised by President Trump as a martyr for truth. There were vigils held globally, too, in Canada, the UK, Australia, Malta, and Korea, showing his international reach within the conservative youth movement.
But the most resonant, jaw-dropping moment for every single person watching was the stark contrast between the two most anticipated speeches. Erica Kirk's message of grace, followed immediately by Trump's declaration of political warfare.
Erica Kirk, his widow, delivered a powerful and profoundly emotional speech that centered entirely on the concept of radical Christian forgiveness. She quoted his favorite Bible verse, Isaiah 6:8, and she explicitly forgave the young man accused of taking her husband's life.
What were her exact words?
She stated with absolute conviction that the answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us.
And immediately following this extraordinary, powerful act of grace, President Trump took the stage, and instead of echoing her message or supporting it, he offered a completely different philosophy.
The contrast was immediate and jarring. Trump acknowledged Charlie's noble spirit, but then he publicly disagreed with the sentiment of forgiveness. He stated plainly, "That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them."
And he concluded the moment with a joke.
He did. He concluded by joking, "Charlie's angry, looking down, he's angry at me now." That moment just perfectly captured the fundamental ideological fracture within the conservative movement and American politics as a whole in 2025, a chasm between Christian doctrine and raw political power.
That is perhaps the most profound contradiction of the year. A message of radical grace delivered at the height of personal tragedy, immediately followed by a declaration of political war and hatred by the leader of that political movement. It truly crystallizes the great fracture.
It does. The political world took the tragedy and used it to harden lines, while the personal, human response was one of profound softness. And the media reaction just reflected that schism. Many conservative commentators struggled to reconcile the two statements, while critics pointed to Trump's comment as proof that the event was less about honoring Kirk and more about consolidating political power under the guise of vengeance.
That intense period of political maneuvering and profound tragedy brings us to the final piece of the 2025 puzzle, the cultural pulse. Section 4 highlights the simultaneous existence of this high-stakes political drama in a world entirely consumed by rapid technology shifts and a decisive realignment toward Asian pop culture.
It is the ultimate expression of the fracture. We are obsessing over entirely different realities. On one hand, you have political martyrs and anti-First Amendment crackdowns. On the other, ultra-slim phones, global streaming dominance, and collectible elves. It felt like the center of cultural gravity had completely disappeared.
So let's start with the tech reality check, the iPhone 17 revolution.
Every year brings a new iPhone, but the iPhone 17 series brought some of the biggest design and feature standardization changes in recent memory.
The headline feature was undoubtedly the new ultra-slim iPhone Air. This wasn't just a slimmed-down model, it was a radical design departure.
It was tiny. It measured just 5.64 millimeters thin and weighed only 165 grams. This was achieved using a sophisticated titanium aluminum alloy frame designed to maintain rigidity, but it really signaled a return to aesthetic minimalism for Apple.
What were the other core upgrades across the entire iPhone 17 lineup that made it a top search trend?
We saw major internal and connectivity overhauls. All the models got the advanced A19 chip, which provided substantial processing power increases. They were also equipped with Wi-Fi 7 and Apple's new C1X modem, which boosted wireless performance and battery efficiency.
But for the average user, the biggest standardization improvement was probably the display.
Which was the inclusion of ProMotion across the board.
Correct. ProMotion, the 120 Hz adaptive refresh rate technology, was previously reserved for the expensive Pro models. In 2025, it was included on every single model in the iPhone 17 lineup. This moved the premium display experience into the mass market, something reviewers called a necessary leap to remain competitive.
And interestingly, the Pro models actually switch materials.
That's right. The high-end Pro models switched their chassis material from titanium, which was popular but kind of divisive in previous iterations, to a brushed aluminum alloy and glass. This design refinement was widely discussed in tech circles, suggesting Apple was prioritizing lightness and durability over the unique texture of titanium.
So from cutting-edge American hardware, let's jump straight to global narrative dominance, which belongs entirely to South Korea and one specific streaming film. We need to talk about K-pop Demon Hunters.
This animated film was an unprecedented cultural phenomenon. It firmly positioned itself as the most watched original title in Netflix history.
By a lot. It racked up a massive 314.2 million views globally. This surpassed previous record holders like Red Notice and even the colossal first season of Squid Game.
That kind of dominance really signals Hollywood's diminishing narrative control. And what does it mean when a Netflix title tops the U.S. box office?
It means the entire distribution model is fractured. K-pop Demon Hunters was the first Netflix movie ever to top the U.S. box office charts. It did so during a limited theatrical sing-along release. It proved that audiences will leave their homes for a cultural phenomenon, regardless of its original distribution model. It forced legacy studios to rethink their entire strategy.
And the music was inescapable.
The theme song Golden became the definitive soundtrack of the summer and fall.
Golden, performed by the fictional girl group Huntrix, was a legitimate global smash hit. It hit #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, the Billboard Global 200, and it held the global #1 spot for an impressive run of about 15 weeks.
And beyond the record-breaking numbers, analysts pointed to the film's success as having serious sociocultural relevance, specifically related to youth well-being. This wasn't just entertainment, it was therapy.
Right. What's fascinating here is the psychological resonance the lyrics had with Generation Z and younger audiences. The song managed to perfectly articulate the tension of modern adolescence. The lyrics admit, "I feel broken, anxious, and not enough," while immediately insisting, "I am still golden."
This message was deemed critical because it helped normalize anxiety and psychological distress for preteens and teenagers, especially girls.
And this cultural phenomenon occurred against a backdrop of deeply concerning global mental health statistics.
Exactly. Data from Australian National Youth Mental Health Surveys showed that rates of youth flourishing had been declining, with a substantial minority, 30 to 40%, reporting high psychological distress.
And the phenomenon was even more pronounced in parts of Asia.
Yes. In Malaysia, 26.9% of adolescents experienced depressive symptoms, a rate that jumps to about 36% among girls. The film provided a global, relatable anthem for this struggling demographic, cementing its success as a form of cultural identity, not just entertainment.
Okay, moving from K-pop to collectible chaos, the third major cultural story of 2025 was the seemingly unstoppable Labubu phenomenon. These were the zoomorphic elves with the sharp teeth that were suddenly everywhere.
Labubu is this adorable but slightly menacing furry monster, a zoomorphic elf with sharp teeth and large ears, created by Hong Kong illustrator Azing Long. The key to its market success and cultural omnipresence was that it was sold primarily through the blind box model by the retailer PopMart.
The hype around these toys reached stratospheric levels, completely detached from their utilitarian value. It drove astronomical prices and made them one of the year's most recognizable symbols.
The media was global, crossing age and class lines. A small vinyl figure might cost $15, but the larger, rarer mega editions could fetch up to $960 on secondary markets.
And the ultimate expression of this hype came in June 2025, when a massive 1.2-meter-tall version of the mint green Labubu sold for a staggering $170,000 at the first official Labubu auction in Beijing.
$170,000. And the chaotic, cute aesthetic of Labubu was so influential, it was credited with driving the trend of cute, slightly dangerous sidekick characters in major studio films that summer.
A single toy selling for $170,000 while economists are nervously monitoring unemployment data that was compromised by a government shutdown, that is the great fracture summarized in a single auction item.
It really is. But this phenomenon wasn't without its own political and ethical controversies. That extreme price point and the methodology of sale were precisely the sources of controversy. The blind box model itself faced heavy criticism for encouraging overconsumption and what critics labeled consumer idolatry.
By creating artificial scarcity and driving addiction-like behavior among collectors,
Hmm.
leading to financial exploitation, particularly among younger buyers.
Right, and the controversy even led to international bans and a kind of moral panic.
This was in Iraq, right?
Yes. In a startling move that shows the disconnect between Western and Middle Eastern cultural concerns, authorities in Iraq's Kurdistan region banned the dolls entirely, seizing at least 4,000 of them. They cited concerns that the toys caused behavioral problems in children and explicitly claimed they contained demonic spirits.
Russia also proposed a ban.
Yes, citing similar concerns about negative effects on children's psyches.
And finally, the toy managed to intersect with domestic American political commentary in the most bizarre way possible.
Of course. South Park, always keen to satirize the most ridiculous cultural trends, featured Labubu in their 2025 episode, Woke is Dead. The episode specifically satirized how Donald Trump's aggressive new tariffs, which, remember, were a top search trend, caused the price of the dolls to skyrocket in the U.S. market.
And they also, appropriately, for a doll accused of containing demonic spirits, depicted the dolls being used for satanic rituals, blending cultural obsession, consumer criticism, and domestic politics into one chaotic, satirical package. So, what does this all mean? If we synthesize the defining moments of 2025, we clearly see the acceleration of the Great Fracture.
Domestically, politics became simultaneously micro-administrative, in the form of government shutdowns that compromised critical statistical data, and intensely ideological, culminating in the Mamdani upset and the horrific Kirk assassination. It was a year where governing stability was just replaced by political existentialism.
Meanwhile, the cultural center of gravity visibly shifted away from the West. The global dominance of K-pop demon hunters and the Labubu phenomenon, the focus on youth anxiety channeled through Korean pop culture, it illustrates that the global youth is looking elsewhere for its narrative and identity anchors. They're largely ignoring the political chaos engulfing North America.
We saw a figure, Charlie Kirk, posthumously celebrated as a martyr for truth, but the very memorial service designed to solidify his legacy instead hosted this profound, immediate, and open debate on the nature of political conflict and forgiveness itself.
That is the ultimate tension of 2025. You have Erica Kirk offering radical Christian love and forgiveness.
And the sitting president offering public hatred and vengeance against opponents immediately following her emotional speech.
When the world is simultaneously consumed by debates over the ethics of a $170,000 zoomorphic elf doll and whether forgiveness is politically viable in public life, what does that tell us about the future state of American consensus?
The key takeaway from 2025 may be that our political world and our cultural world are not just divided. They're increasingly operating on separate planets with dramatically different values and preoccupations. The political world is consumed by the past and by vengeance, while the cultural world is rushing towards a future defined by globalized, digital, and often emotionally resonant Asian entertainment.
And that separation is the great inheritance we take into the new year. The provocative question for you, the listener, is this. How long can a society hold together when its highest political figures embrace hatred as a defining principle, while the culture its youth consumes is defined by a deep need for assurance that, despite anxiety, I am still golden?
The two worlds are just talking past each other.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this exploration helps you navigate the fractured reality of 2025.
And what a year it's been. The entertainment world alone lost some of its brightest stars, from Robert Redford to Diane Keaton.
It really feels like the end of a golden age in Hollywood, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Robert Redford passed away at 89 in his Sundance, Utah home in September. He wasn't just an actor, he was an institution.
And then we lost Diane Keaton at 79 to pneumonia. These weren't just celebrities, they were cultural touchstones.
And let's not forget Malcolm Jamal Warner, who tragically died at 54 during a family trip to Costa Rica. He was caught in a high current while body surfing.
That one hit particularly hard because it was so unexpected. He was still so young.
And we lost Ozzy Osbourne at 76, 5 years after his Parkinson's diagnosis. The Prince of Darkness finally went quiet.
You know, while we're processing all these losses, the world kept throwing other challenges at us too.
That's right. Natural disasters hit the global economy for $220 billion this year, according to Swiss Re.
Wait, $220 billion? That's staggering.
And the Los Angeles wildfires in January alone caused $40 billion in insured losses, making it the costliest wildfire in history.
It's almost like the planet itself was in mourning this year.
You know what's interesting, though? Even in all this darkness, people found ways to find joy.
Are you talking about the Labubu craze?
Exactly. Those little toothy plush monsters became the year's must-have accessory. They even had their own float at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
And didn't one sell for like $170,000 in China?
Yes, a life-size one. It's amazing how something so simple could bring so much joy during such a challenging year.
Speaking of joy, we can't forget about Katy Perry's space adventure.
Oh, right. When she went up in Blue Origin's rocket with Gayle King and Lauren Sanchez. That was quite a moment.
That image of her singing What a Wonderful World while holding a daisy in space became such a meme.
It was the first all-female spaceflight since 1963. Whatever you think of the optics, that's pretty significant.
Let's talk about some of the other cultural moments that defined the year.
Well, Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance was historic. It became the most watched halftime show ever with 133.5 million viewers.
And that was right after he won 5 Grammys for Not Like Us, right?
Exactly. That Drake feud really dominated the first part of the year.
But while we were watching all this entertainment drama unfold, the climate crisis kept getting worse.
According to CDRI's report, infrastructure disruptions accounted for 80% of disaster-related losses across climate-vulnerable countries.
That's devastating. And it's not just about money, is it?
No, the human cost is enormous. During the June heat wave, 848 out of every 100,000 Massachusetts residents visited emergency rooms for heat-related illness.
And Massachusetts experienced a record 1,300 wildfires this year alone.
It's like we're watching both our cultural and environmental landscapes transform simultaneously.
You know what's striking? The contrast between how we mourn celebrities and how we process these climate disasters.
That's an interesting point. One feels immediate and personal, while the other is so vast it's almost hard to grasp.
Yet both are reshaping our world in profound ways.
And both require us to adapt to a new normal, whether it's saying goodbye to cultural icons or facing environmental challenges.
Let's talk about some of the other notable losses this year.
We lost David Lynch in January at 78. His impact on film and television was immeasurable.
And Val Kilmer at 65 after his long battle with throat cancer.
Gene Hackman passed at 95, along with his wife Betsy. That was particularly heartbreaking.
It feels like we're losing the last connections to a certain era of Hollywood.
And each loss seems to carry more weight than just the individual. It's about what they represented.
Speaking of representation, how do you think future generations will remember 2025?
I think they'll see it as a turning point, when we had to face both our cultural mortality and our environmental vulnerability.
That's a heavy legacy.
But maybe it's also an opportunity. These losses and challenges could inspire us to preserve what matters and change what needs changing.
You know, it's interesting how some of the year's biggest moments were about looking back, while others were about looking forward.
Like how we mourned Robert Redford while watching Katy Perry sing in space.
Exactly. It's like we're standing at this intersection between what was and what will be.
And maybe that's what makes 2025 so significant. It's forcing us to reckon with both loss and possibility.
Do you think there's hope in all this change?
I think there has to be. Even in our darkest moments this year, people found ways to connect and create joy.
Like with those Labibus, something so simple bringing people together.
Or how communities came together after disasters. The human spirit is remarkably resilient.
So what's the takeaway from this year of goodbyes?
That every ending creates space for a new beginning. Yes, we lost icons, but their influence lives on in the culture they helped shape.
And the environmental challenges?
Their wake-up calls, the $220 billion in disaster costs this year, shows we can't keep ignoring these issues.
It's like 2025 is telling us, honor the past, but prepare for the future.
And maybe that's the perfect way to say goodbye to this year, with respect for what we've lost and hope for what's ahead.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to say our own goodbye to 2025 and to this episode of Copilot Podcasts.
And remember, while we can't
Podcasts. When the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve, we'll be saying goodbye to more than just another year. 2025 took from us some of the brightest stars in Hollywood's constellation.
Yeah, it's been a really heavy year for losses in entertainment. The sheer number of legends we've lost is staggering.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the cultural impact of 2025, the icons we lost, the trends that defined us, and how this year changed entertainment forever.
And what a year it's been. I mean, just looking at the names, Robert Redford, Gene Hackman, Diane Keaton.
Let's start with Robert Redford. He passed away at 89 in his Sundance, Utah home in September.
Right, and what's particularly poignant is how these losses often came in waves, like Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy being found together in their Santa Fe home.
That was such a haunting story. Hackman had been suffering from Alzheimer's and passed from heart disease, likely unaware his wife had died from hantavirus a week earlier.
And then we lost Diane Keaton at 79 in October. It really felt like the end of an era for that generation of Hollywood.
Speaking of endings, the music world wasn't spared either. Ozzy Osbourne's passing really hit hard.
Yeah, the Prince of Darkness left us at 76, just weeks after his final concert, 5 years after his Parkinson's diagnosis.
But 2025 wasn't all about loss. There were some incredible cultural moments too. Remember the Labubu craze?
Oh my goodness, those toothy plush dolls. They went from being Lisa from Blackpink's Secret Obsession to having their own float at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
And they even had police involved in California because of heists. A life-size Labubu sold for more than $170,000 in China.
It's wild how these quirky collectibles captured everyone's imagination. Even Kim Kardashian jumped on the bandwagon with her collection.
And speaking of cultural phenomena, we can't forget Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance.
That was incredible. 133.5 million viewers, making it the most watched Super Bowl halftime show ever recorded.
With Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam and Serena Williams making that surprise appearance.
And performing Not Like Us right after winning 5 Grammys for it. That Drake feud really dominated the year.
Until that federal judge dismissed Drake's defamation suit against Universal Music Group in October.
You know what's interesting? While we were losing so many legends, we also saw some historic wins. Like Beyoncé finally getting that Album of the Year Grammy.
For Cowboy Carter. That was such a powerful moment, especially with Blue Ivy by her side.
After all those years and all those Grammys, that was the one that had eluded her. Even Jay-Z had called out the Recording Academy about it.
And then there were the unexpected losses, like Michelle Trachtenberg at just 39.
Right, the former Buffy star. And Malcolm Jamal Warner at 54 during that family trip to Costa Rica.
The year even took Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle in what authorities called an apparent homicide.
It's been a year of such stark contrasts, moments of triumph alongside profound loss.
And speaking of contrasts, while all this was happening, the TikTok ban drama was playing out.
Oh, right, the ban that never actually happened. Everyone was rushing to join Red Note in protest.
Until Trump finally struck that deal in September to transfer majority ownership to Americans.
You know what's fascinating? Even with all these losses and changes, pop culture kept evolving. Look at the success of K-pop Demon Hunters.
Those fictional groups, Saja Boys and Hunter X, became real global phenomena.
People were even dressing up as the group members for Halloween. That's when you know something's really hit the zeitgeist.
And we saw this interesting trend of female-led achievements too, like that all-female Blue Origin spaceflight.
Yes, Katy Perry, Gayle King, and Lauren Sanchez, among others. The first all-female spaceflight since Valentina Tereshkova in 1963.
That meme of Perry holding up a daisy and singing "What a Wonderful World" in space went absolutely viral.
It really captured that mix of achievement and pop culture that defined 2025.
Let's talk about how these losses affected the entertainment industry as a whole.
Well, we're seeing the end of certain eras in Hollywood. The passing of Redford, Hackman, and Keaton, these were the last of a particular generation.
A generation that really defined what it meant to be a movie star.
Exactly. And it's not just about losing individual talents, it's about losing entire chapters of Hollywood history.
The stories they could tell, the experiences they had.
And what's interesting is how their passing coincided with such massive changes in entertainment consumption.
Right, like how streaming and social media have completely transformed the industry they helped build.
Speaking of transformation, this year really showed us how quickly cultural phenomena can rise and fall.
Like those AI slop trends that Macquarie Dictionary named Word of the Year.
Yes, all those viral fake videos and AI-generated content that flooded our feeds.
From fake bunnies on trampolines to that New York subway romance video.
And brands faced such backlash for using AI models in their ads. Remember the Vogue and Coca-Cola controversies?
It really showed how people are craving authenticity in an increasingly artificial world.
Maybe that's why the losses this year hit so hard. These were real people who made real, lasting impacts.
And their authenticity was part of what made them legendary.
You know, looking back, 2025 feels like a year of transition. Between the old guard and the new, between real and artificial.
Between what we're losing and what we're gaining.
Exactly. And maybe that's what makes it such a pivotal year in cultural history.
As we wrap up, what do you think will be 2025's lasting legacy?
I think it'll be remembered as the year we said goodbye to not just individuals, but to entire eras of entertainment and culture.
While simultaneously witnessing the birth of new cultural phenomena and technological trends.
It's like we're standing at this crossroads between past and future, between what was and what will be.
And maybe that's the perfect way to end 2025, acknowledging what we've lost while looking forward to what's next.
Because ultimately, that's what keeps culture alive, this constant cycle of remembering and reinventing.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Copilot Podcasts. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 2025.
And as we say goodbye to 2025, let's remember not just what we've lost, but what those losses taught us about what truly matters in culture.
Here's to honoring the past while embracing whatever 2026 has in store for us all.